and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Police in the UK say a 53-year-old British man has been arrested after a car hit several people during Liverpool FC's victory parade. Hamas agreed to a Gaza ceasefire in a proposal by US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, according to Reuters news agency, but Witkoff does deny these claims. Trump accuses Putin of going absolutely crazy as Russia fires hundreds of drones and missiles at Ukraine. And King Charles has arrived in Canada ahead of the opening of the country's parliament on Tuesday. We are starting the show with breaking news from Liverpool in England, where a car has collided with several pedestrians in Liverpool city centre during Liverpool FC's Premier League victory parade. Merseyside police confirmed that the vehicle stopped at the scene and a driver, a 53-year-old white British man, has now been arrested. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Dubai 92 presenter Jono Hayes and former editor-in-chief and media strategist Michael Jabri-Pickett. Jono, terrible scenes we are seeing there in Liverpool. Do we have any details?
So we know that this has been, obviously for the last couple of days, we've heard stories about this. Thousands of people will have shown up in Liverpool to line the streets for the 20th Top Flight League title homecoming, which is what was happening today. Now, from reports from onlookers, this started at 2 p.m. local time this afternoon. The parade began, and it's about a 14-kilometre route. So it will have taken quite a bit of time to get around that entire route, and obviously jubilation and celebrations from the onlookers as well. At about 6 p.m. local time there, one pedestrian who was on the side of the street said that a car travelling at around 50 kilometres an hour could be heard travelling through the crowd of many people, and the videos of this seem to be quite horrific and quite shocking, and they described a ping-ping sound of people actually being hit with the cars. So currently no reports if there's anyone who's been injured. There's been scenes of ambulance there with people being taken off on stretchers. We don't know if there's been any fatalities, although there have been casualties. But a lot of kids and a lot of families will have been on the Water Street route in Liverpool watching this homecoming parade, as it was such a moment of great joy, which has now been marred by such a tragic event, it seems.
Absolutely, and we're just seeing live pictures there on our screen, Michael and Jono. And just to repeat that, 53-year-old British man has been detained after a car collides with a number of pedestrians in Liverpool, as you said, during that victory parade for Liverpool FC. And we've actually heard from the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. He says scenes in Liverpool are appalling, but it is important. This story is developing extremely quickly. No details yet on numbers or fatalities of anything at all.
Nor on motive behind this either, so we don't know. Anything now is currently purely speculation. And again, this is from social media, what people are posting online. These videos do look horrific, however, and as Keir Starmer said, it's a great tragedy, and hopefully we can just hope that nobody is mortally injured in this.
And we'll definitely bring you any breaking news lines as they do come out on that story in Liverpool. But we're going to move on to our next story, and reports are circulating that Hamas have agreed to a Gaza ceasefire in a proposal by US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. That's according to Reuters news agency, who were told by a Palestinian official on Monday. The new deal would reportedly see the release of 10 hostages and 7 days of truce. However, Steve Witkoff has denied these claims, according to Axios, and says the group's stance is disappointing and unacceptable. Michael, we'll actually start with you first. Kind of good signals coming out, but we're obviously not sure if they've agreed to the ceasefire, if what's actually going to happen. But does this possibly start paving the way to the end of the war?
I don't want to sound like a cliche machine, but I think we're going to have to just wait and see. And the reason is because right now you're getting Steve Witkoff, who's maybe not confirming everything that Reuters is reporting. And I think we also have to wait to hear what the Israeli Prime Minister is going to say, who apparently will be speaking at some point tomorrow. But it's better than the alternative, which is nothing. And that seems to have been what's been going on for far too long, is that there is international outrage, but very little that actually happens. Here we have the Americans coming in and it seems negotiating directly with Hamas, which also speaks, I think, quite interestingly to perhaps Israel is starting to face something that they haven't faced in a long time on the international stage, which is isolation. Just over the weekend, you had the Canadian Prime Minister and also the French and German government, no, it was French governments and British governments, Canadian government, talking about how things have to change in Gaza or else there will be consequences. And to me, it seems as though what we're facing now is the US and Donald Trump are getting sick of this war going on, and they're looking for some good news to report and also something so that this war can come to an end.
So we are just getting reports through now, actually, on Reuters that the US envoy denies Hamas has agreed to his Gaza deal. So we've heard from Steve Woodcock, we were reporting that earlier before. And Jono, I just wonder, right now, all this confusion, we've got to think about the aid getting into the country because that has been really stalled. We know Jake Wood resigned from the US-backed Gaza aid efforts. You know, this has become at a really murky time. And what does this mean really for the people in Gaza?
So obviously he's been the executive director of the US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is the GHF. He resigned just yesterday on that at, as you said, a very pivotal time, Leigh-Ann, in the fact that, yes, some aid is getting through, but it's in the south of the country. And we've seen the videos from the north of the country, which is where the aid is required most at the moment. And it seems that the aid is just not getting through there. The reason he's resigned, he says it's a lack of independence, a lack of neutrality and impartiality, and more importantly, the job that he's there to do, a lack of humanity. Is what he's describing in the aid operation. He said there is some serious doubts, not verbatim, but there's serious doubts on the credibility of GHF, and his resignation will only cast light on that even further. Now, the US State Department said that they will reaffirm that they are going to support the Foundation's plan. However, we don't know if this departure is going to now send a stronger message that perhaps the GHF are unable to deliver what they have set out to do and to help with the Palestinian displacement and the issue that's taking place right now. They're going to continue to try and reach the 1 million Palestinians who they've set out to try and help, but without Jake Wood at the helm of this, it seems, as it continues on. So no word on if there's a replacement just yet.
Well, earlier I spoke to media advisor and UNRWA spokesperson Adnan Abu Hasna about the situation on the ground. Let's just take a listen.
Are telling us that there are, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. They are starving, actually. People they have nothing to eat. Sometimes, the entire family eat, maybe some breads for every 2 or 3 breads every 48 hours or 72 hours. It's unbelievable. There is no drinkable water at all, and because of that, the number of sick people are rising and rising. You cannot imagine that we actually treated in 4 days or 5 days nearly 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza. It never happened before. We are talking about a place that 90% of Gaza infrastructure, desalination, everything, houses, shelters had been completely destroyed. You know what they are doing now? They are destroying what had been destroyed, before. And now the people are they have no umbrella, they have no protection at all, and they are exposed to death, to hunger, to being thirsty all the time.
And Michael, I just wondered, right now, we saw that interview. We've also seen the footage coming out over the weekend as Israel continues its offensive into Gaza, and those horrific pictures coming out of the devastation and the destruction of buildings. What is Israel's strategy right now, or do you think there is one?
I don't think there is one. I think Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy is to stay in power for as long as possible because he has so many criminal cases that he's going to face if he ever is out of office. The international community is constantly wondering, what is the strategy? The Israeli Defense Ministry is wondering what the strategy is. This, I think, is the biggest issue that is facing Israel at this moment. If they came out with a clear and concise strategy, this is what we're trying to do, this is what it is that this is how long we're going to be in Gaza, and then we're going to leave. But nobody believes any longer that it's about freeing the hostages, because Hamas has come out and said, we are willing to free hostages with certain terms and conditions if those are met. Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't seem to be prepared to just go after the hostages. He says he wants that, but he also says he wants to destroy Hamas. I don't know that those two things are possible at the same time.
So it's interesting you say that, because, Jono, lots of analysts I've spoken to on the show regarding the situation between Hamas and Israel have always said to me, Hamas are not going to give up. They've got nothing to lose here. You know, they are deep in the tunnels. They've got food. The hostages are their bargaining chip. But do you think now the situation's got to the stage where Hamas are like, actually, we're prepared to agree and start releasing hostages, and we know we can't, the situation's untenable?
Hamas have to have realised by now that we're 2.5 months into no fuel, no close to zero medical supplies, no food getting through. The warning of famine is just looming ever greater every single day. Hamas at some stage have to realise that the jig is up. They have to go, okay, we may need to take a step back. The hostages may need to be released. Otherwise, we are going to be no further along on the process. Keeping in mind the Israeli strike from yesterday, where 36 people were killed in a school in Gaza City. This in itself is a strong message. They've said that this is a stronghold for Hamas. We're still waiting to find the evidence of that to be provided by the Israeli military force, and that hasn't come forward just yet. At some point, you have to take stock and realise that it's your people, your 1.6 million people, who are suffering the brunt of Hamas's belligerence in this. And I believe that until, and if you've just said, they've just said right now that they have not reached any ceasefire agreement, until they release the hostages, there can be no further discussion on the ceasefire. Unfortunately, no further removal of the blockade on aid getting into the country.
But we're about a week shy of 600 days of war. I don't know that anyone would have thought we would have been going for this long. And what Israel has to recognize is that Hamas is 10, maybe 20,000 people. How are you going to get just those people and not, more than 24 children who are also in a school? And this is where there is this lack of strategy. There's this indiscriminate bombing, or so it appears. There is constantly the same refrain from Israel, which is, it's a command and control center from Hamas. And then it just goes away and we all move on to the next terrible tragedy tomorrow. The international community is, I think, the only party that can stop Israel. And I think what this message sends about maybe the US, at the very least, seeming to negotiate with Hamas without Israel, I think that is probably the path towards your original question to me about what will end this war. I think more US intervention directly with Hamas, I think that's the path forward.
Well, thank you so much for bringing your points on that. It was been a very difficult time in Gaza that we've seen over the past 48 hours. But let's move on to our second story. And US President Donald Trump has threatened Russia with more sanctions after Moscow launched its biggest drone attack on Ukraine since the start of the war over the weekend. Speaking to reporters, the US president called out the Russian President Vladimir Putin before telling his Truth Social followers Putin had gone absolutely crazy. Take a listen.
Yeah, I'll give you an update. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
Mr. President, what do you want to do about
And
that?
I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. We'll see what we're going to do. Killing people. And something happened to this guy, and I don't like it.
There we are. So, Jono, Trump basically says Putin's gone absolutely crazy. We saw that in the clip. Clear frustration. He said he doesn't like what's happening. What do you make in the sudden shift in tone from someone who's long emphasized a good relationship with the Russian leader? They had a phone call, was it just a week ago?
Yeah.
And they were saying it was so friendly, no one knew who should put the phone down first, basically.
Yeah, and that was a 2.5-hour conversation
Yeah.
that you would hope would have had. But it's 367 drones being sent into Ukraine, which now has stirred things up a little bit, so to speak. This by Donald Trump, this is tough talk. This is Trump's version of tough talk is what this is. This is showing strength, showing power, showing Russia that I will not stand back and tolerate you sending 367 drones in when we're on the brink of what may or may not be some peaceful talks, negotiations. So Putin's behaviour is escalating. Trump, as a result, is using frank and informal language to say, I'm not going to tolerate this. This is not how I'm going to run this negotiation. And I think what we've seen today is a defiance of that and saying, right, I am looking for diplomacy. I can't combine diplomacy with sweet talking. So instead, I'm going to lay it down on the line and say, I'm not happy with what Putin has decided to do here. And without saying it, indirectly hinting that action will be taken unless this offensive seems to be stood down slightly, which is where I think we're at now. He is a man who is emotionally overloaded, which is exactly how the Kremlin have described it. So they've not come out in defiance and said, listen, what are you saying about Putin? They have not come out and said that. The Kremlin have said somewhat of a thank you towards recognizing the fact that this is something that's just happened. It's a really bizarre situation that they're in, and I feel that Russia will now have to take a step back and say, this is, without it being a threat, somewhat of a threat.
Do you think Russia views it as somewhat of a threat?
No, not at all. I think Russia is playing high-stakes diplomacy. I also think, over the weekend, as was pointed out earlier, this was the biggest bombardment from Russians against the Ukrainians since the start of the war. And the US president, who for 80 years, that person would be responsible for engaging with all sorts of different actors on the global stage, picking up the phone, flying somewhere, having his people engage, making sure that there are talks going on, making sure that at least the international community can see that something is happening, even if it's behind closed doors. Instead, we have the US president, who used to be a reality TV star, going on social media and using capital letters to say that the Russian president is crazy. This is not diplomacy, and I really don't believe that this bothers Vladimir Putin, because it allows him to focus on the end game, which is more land for him in Ukraine.
And that's a very good point, because we do know it's coming into the summer season, and it is in many ways, in the eyes of Russia, prime time to attack. But I wonder about the social media situation and leaders using social media, because Zelensky uses it all the time. Really, if we have a look at things, I know Putin doesn't, but I think Zelensky's been very vocal on social media.
And I think this is a different administration. And I appreciate what you say, Michael, when you say he jumps on socially in capital letters, almost shouts that, but this is his style. I think this is the style that, gone are the days, for now at least during this administration, whereby a press conference will be held and we'll have somebody from the press office stand and say from a pulpit, this is what the US presidency as a house believes, or as a institution believes. Instead, Donald Trump will just quite happily go and spout what he feels at that moment in large. And I think that's the administration you're getting here. That's his version of saying enough is enough.
I understand that, but I also think that what you have to do is you have to meet your opponent in the environment in which your opponent is going to most likely respond. So Donald Trump going on social media is Donald Trump. But Vladimir Putin doesn't care about that. What Donald Trump has to do is figure out what is it, and this is what high stakes diplomacy is all about. What is it that my opponent needs or wants or fears the most? And how can I be effective? going on social media, using capital letters, is not going to bother Vladimir Putin. And what that does is it makes Donald Trump the star of the show, which is what he wants. But what is it that Vladimir Putin wants? That's the challenge, because the only person who's going to stop this is Vladimir Putin. What Donald Trump has to do is figure out what is the carrot and what is the stick. And capital letters on social media is neither.
You would think by now, seeing as they are such good friends, as President Trump has said himself, they're such good friends, that by now he would have a better steer on what kind of a person he's dealing with here. Although we do know a little bit about him not wanting to share the spotlight, which we've discussed a couple of weeks ago when he refused to travel to Turkey, because that would be sharing the global stage and the global spotlight with other world leaders. So we do know a little bit that he may be a bit egotistical, and that something like this, I just think if it wasn't being taken seriously, the Kremlin would have responded differently than saying almost a thank you and then saying it was an emotional outburst on President Trump's part. I feel like they should have come up with something better, and they would have come up with something more retaliatory if they'd felt unthreatened by it.
But I think that the Kremlin knows how to play this game. Again, they are being strategic. They know what their end game is. I believe it's more inroads into Ukraine. So if you can let the president think that he's landed a shot, then you give a little bit to his ego. I think that allows these things to stretch out. I mean, it was almost a month ago that Marco Rubio said, any day now, we're going to know if we're going to continue or not. And there's been no inroads except for the Russians on the ground in the Ukraine. I think everything else is just window dressing.
And you think he's angry to the point, and you would be. We've said he's been looking for the win on this. He's not got that win yet. He's not got what I would see as close to that win. Trump seems to have it hasn't moved forward to the point where he wants. And I think now what we're seeing is an emotional outburst. To be fair, that is quite an emotional speech. And I think he just wants a solution quickly.
Well, what's interesting is Donald Trump, and in many ways this back and forth, we have for the first time seen Ukrainian and Russian diplomats meeting in Turkey. So there has been some inroads. I don't know how far they're going, but we're getting diplomats in the same country, which we haven't seen for a long time. And also just today, Germany's new chancellor says that his country and other major allies are no longer imposing any range restrictions on weapons supplied to Ukraine as it fights the Russian invasion. So we're now seeing Europe have a bigger involvement defense-wise, and that's something, of course, that the US wanted them to do. But I'm sure this is not the end of the conversation. We'll definitely be speaking about this a lot more. We'll see what unfolds in the coming days. We're going to move on to another story now, and French President Emmanuel Macron has arrived in Vietnam for a tour of Southeast Asia. However, it was this footage of Macron appearing to be struck by his wife Brigitte as the couple prepared to leave the aircraft at Hanoi Airport, which has made headlines. The Elysee Palace initially denied the legitimacy of the clip after it went viral overnight. But French media have now confirmed that that clip is absolutely real. Jono, let's start with the footage itself. Now, how unusual is it to see such a personal, seemingly tense moment between a world leader and their spouse?
Look, this is extremely rare. We don't see these unscripted personal moments that often at all, especially anything that hints at tension, which could potentially scupper somebody's political career. Most of these are obviously highly choreographed, these public appearances, especially on a state visit as such. But this has been a let the guard down type of moment, and the setting really amplifies how this is an embarrassment. Second of all, the fact that first the palace initially just denied and then later confirmed is also it's a huge slap in the face, no pun intended with that. But what we're seeing here is a domestic issue on a public stage, and a worrying domestic issue is what I would describe it as well. And no one seems to be focusing on that point of view, whereby he has been hit by his wife, regardless of where it's happened. And that seems to be the second question to everyone wondering about, well, why was this happening in a public stage? Why was it happening full stop has not been asked as a question.
No, and obviously they have tried to play it down as much as they can. Macron denies dispute with wife. He's blaming disinformation. He said we were having a squabble. We were rather joking. And I was taken by surprise. But like Jono says, are we missing the main point here?
It's tricky because it's a woman, a wife hitting, slapping, pushing, shoving her husband. And I don't know where the right and I don't know what the right and the wrong answer is, because we're all conditioned to accept a certain type of behavior when it's being received by the man. And I don't know if today's society is ready to have that conversation. Also, it wasn't the most violent. It was an attack, and it was maybe even an assault. But there doesn't seem to be, to my mind, anything that would be more than that. Now, I think because men and women are different, if it was the other way around, it would 100% be a much bigger issue. But I think we have to realize that men and women are different beings. And I think that the physical aspect of it makes for a different result. And I think that that needs to be taken into account.
I think it's very uncomfortable to see something like this. But the conversation, it wouldn't be a conversation. The outcry that we would be having today had it been Melania Trump and Donald Trump in a similar altercation, but whereby he had struck her. Or if Emmanuel Macron had turned around and struck his wife for any reason whatsoever, it would be a different conversation.
And I agree with you, and it should be. But I don't know if we can have that same conversation if a woman strikes a man.
And I don't know why that is, because the exact same, it is a physical threat and a physical violence that we are outraged at when it is shoes on the other foot. But with this, it's been somewhat played down, and like you said, it's been called a personal moment between the two. I don't know of many functioning relationships whereby I think that any sort of physical altercation will be seen as acceptable, and that's what concerns me greatly about this. But I can 100% see where you're coming from. But it does concern me that if it was the other way around, we would not be having this conversation. He would be ousted from office.
And I would agree with you on that, but I always feel like Emmanuel Macron has always had quite a hard time in the press moving away from this. But I wonder how moments like this really affect him politically, because he's in Vietnam, he's on a presidential tour, he's there for a reason. You know, he's putting France center stage when it comes to the economy. We know tariffs could go on to the EU. You know, there's a lot happening in the world. And I wonder what this does for his political reputation. You know, we spoke about what could have happened if the shoe was on the other foot, but this is a difficult position for the French president.
So it is, but his political credibility, I don't think, would be affected. His public opinion might be, especially back home. I think that we live in a society, in an age, where, well, the sitting US president was, a year ago this month, convicted of 34 counts, one being falsifying business documents. That was in response to payment of a woman he slept with. We know that these things go on. We know what happened with King Charles and his first wife. We know behind the scenes, it's as messy as anybody's personal life.
Well, they're human.
Yes.
In many respects, and that's something we have to remember.
And what makes this one different, though, is that we saw something that wasn't being reenacted 25 years later in a TV show. That's what makes it, I think, unique, and that's what will, I think, damage his public image, but I don't think his political credibility will be hurt.
He is, at the end of the day, the victim on this as well. So I don't think it would be right for his political career to suffer, given that he is the victim of, and for call it whatever it is, domestic abuse, but in a very public setting, which is unfortunate. But it's and that's how it's been described by the media as well. It's been a mask of real emotions that for one moment was lifted. which I think is a very flowery way to say that he was hit by his wife, really, to be honest. And I don't know if I think that that's good for him politically or personally.
And I think this conversation is actually going to rumble on for a little bit longer, because when we saw all the footage today on social media, it definitely went viral and people have very strong opinions on this matter. But thank you for discussing yours with me. And we're going to go to our next story now. And King Charles begins his tour of Canada today, his first as the country's head of state. The British monarch and Queen Camilla will meet the country's newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney when they arrive in Ottawa later. The King will open Canada's Parliament on Tuesday, a task only undertaken by Queen Elizabeth in 1957. Actually, Michael, I'm just going to bring us up to date. We do know that King Charles has already arrived in Ottawa. We saw him being greeted by Mark Carney as he got off the plane, and there seemed to actually be a really excited, jubilant crowd to meet King Charles. What do you make of this?
Well, as a Canadian, I can tell you that the majority of Canadians are in favor of the monarchy. I know that other parts of the Commonwealth are not always so respectful. And I know that there have been referendums in certain countries where they have said we would like to no longer be part of the Commonwealth. But for Canadians, King Charles is the King of Canada, which I think is a great name for a band, by the way. But I also know that Canadians respect tradition. And there's something about that connection still. We are part of the Commonwealth. And I think that there is still, the monarchy goes back so far that Canadians, they appreciate that there is still that connection. And this would be one of the reasons why there would still be, jubilant crowds when it is that he comes and visits.
Yeah, no, and it was really nice because there were so many children there to meet him, actually, Jono. But I'm just wondering, I don't know, if right now Canada is looking to have even closer ties with King Charles, and they've invited him over to open Parliament. But he is walking such a tricky tightrope at the moment, because this all comes amid delicate conversations with America about trade between Canada and the US, and also Donald Trump has said he'd like to make Canada the 51st state. Is Charles the right person of soft power to make things a little bit better?
Well, I think what this is, and exactly that, it's a soft power signal more than anything else, and it's a move that's been orchestrated, and I think by Mark Carney, in order to bring this about. If the monarchy is so well loved in Canada, which it seems that they are, and they have no intention whatsoever, then the last person you want to send across is a political figure. And you want to send somebody who's got the support of the public. Queen Elizabeth, as far as I'm aware, very dearly loved in her reign in Canada. Now, as King Charles takes over the reins from her, sending somebody of this level, a political figurehead of, he is the king, it's a bold move, and I think it's a wise move towards the US to say, listen, we understand that you guys may have some designs on Canada as part of the US. However, we're quite happy how things are. And I'm sure a different situation would take place at many other Commonwealth countries. As you so rightly said, Michael, if you'd sent King Charles to somewhere else on a state visit, it might be a different scenario. But it's been nothing but a show of support from the Canadians at large. And I think that in itself is a testament to the fact that Canadians want to remain part of the Commonwealth, and they want to, more importantly, remain Canadian. And so I don't know if it's necessarily such a soft show of power, but a really strong show of power, which may go down well.
Winston Churchill had said that Canada is the linchpin that connects the UK with the United States. And in an interesting twist of fate, I think that the British monarchy is now the linchpin that's connecting, bridging America to Canada. And Mark Carney has said that this is 100% done specifically to attract the attention of the American president. What he wants to do is he wants to send a message. And when the throne speech is delivered, that speech is written by Mark Carney. And I recently listened to the new U.S. ambassador to Canada being interviewed by the CBC. And he said that we will, as Americans, be listening very carefully to that speech, because we know that it's coming from the Prime Minister. And we know that there will be the obvious similar sounding expressions that were used on the campaign trail, but we also know that there will be messages for us And that's what we're going to pay close attention to. And for King Charles to come in and deliver that message, because there is great affection on the part of Donald Trump towards King Charles, for him to be that person that Donald Trump respects, there, by extension, could be, well, also maybe respect the government that I represent, and maybe not so much talk about 51st state.
Yeah. You wait 70 years from the last time, I think they said 1957, almost 70 years since Queen Elizabeth opened Parliament. So you know that it's going to be a monumentous occasion. And I think the wrong thing to do in that situation would have been sent over someone like Keir Starmer, who may or may not have had any public support. But a royal visit is something of, I'm sure, great jubilation in Canada. And that, I think, is a smart move. And I think that will probably solidify Mark Carney in his first 3 weeks. Are we into his power?
Yeah, absolutely. And
smart move.
Very smart move from Mark Carney. I do think that, and as we know, King Charles has arrived in Ottawa for the historic opening of Canada's Parliament. I always like the pomp and ceremony of these events, so we'll be looking forward to watching it tomorrow. And finally, we've reached that point in the show where Jono and Michael, you've come up with a couple of quirky stories of the day. And Jono, yours is so interesting because I think everyone in the world is going to relate to this story or have an issue with something. It's about the most annoying things about flying have been revealed.
And there's a new winner in there as well. Previously, it had been people reclining their seats or putting their hair over the back of their seats. Now it's been replaced out by kids kicking the back of your seat. It is the most annoying thing on board.
Can I just say one thing? I went to the cinema this weekend, and I mean, I did go to watch Lilo and Stitch, I know, but a kid was kicking my seat the whole time in the cinema, and it was the most annoying thing ever.
Well, there's now new ones that weren't in there previously when you're on board a plane, which involve people listening to their multimedia out loud, so without putting their headphones in. Along with crying babies. And I don't normally take umbrage with crying babies when it's on a flight because I think they can't really help it. But if a kid is kicking my seat, I am going to be saying something about that, along with the 36% of people. By the way, quite a majority of them will have a verbal altercation with a fellow passenger about somebody kicking their back of their seat.
36%?
Yeah, and I would be part of that statistic.
Would you,
sure.
Michael?
In my last role, I wrote a piece talking about how I would pay extra to be on flights with no children.
Oh, me too.
Oh, great idea.
Oh, brilliant idea.
And this is not...
I'm sold, you know.
This is going to sound slightly like I'm going backwards, but an area within the aircraft whereby parents with kids sit, because I completely understand and I sympathise with any parent on a long-haul flight. It must be an absolute nightmare, but I think maybe, can we just congregate them in one area?
So we would have to congregate them in one area and then seal them off so we couldn't hear them. And this is, I have 2 children. And I've flown with them when they were infants. What bothers me, and this, I love your story today, what bothers me is the lack of attention that the parents give to the crying child. If I see, as a fellow parent, that you're making an effort, much like in the world of sports, I'm okay with that. I'll cut you all the slack in the world. But if you're sitting there with your headphones and watching your movie while your child beside you is screaming his or her head off, that's when I have no patience.
So I'm just laughing at the moment because Beth, the producer, in my ear, is saying it needs to be balanced. Kids need to go on holiday.
Of course, kids should be on all flights at all times, and it's devastating otherwise. So, but the other issue that people are having is that there are chatty customers on board as well. So this is another annoyance as well, where 34% of people said they don't want to have a chat with the person next to them.
I speak to everybody next to me. We'd be best friends after the flight.
I don't know where you draw the line on that, because you don't walk down the street, stop a random person, have a conversation with them, and that is effectively this. But we're both in chairs. We don't need to converse. I'm on board the plane because I need to get somewhere. You're doing the same thing. I don't care why you're getting there or how long it's going to... I don't care about your backstory.
I think that's a bit not me.
It may be, but I'm joining the people who are pet peeved on flights.
After the flight, friends for life, besties, you never know. Just have a conversation, live a little. Okay, he doesn't like that. Okay, we're over that.
Not a fan on that.
He's not a fan. I bet you Michael wouldn't want to talk to me either on a plane. But anyway, let's move on to your story. It's about a man who quit his job to set sail to Hawaii. But guess who he's taken with him? His cat. What more?
His cat named Phoenix. You always have to get the name of the animal in.
Yes.
Which personalizes it and really draws a connection between the viewer and the story. But I think most of my stories are either social media or animals. This one is social media and animals, because what's happened, 29-year-old man receives bad news, decides my life has to be more about just my job. Quits his job, never been a sailor, decides to learn by watching YouTube videos, and then from that point, he decides he's going to sail around the world. So what he decided to do first, though, was he went from Oregon in the States on the West Coast. It took him about 3 weeks, and he landed in Waikiki on the Big Island in Hawaii, greeted by, strangely, the governor. And that's because he and his cat, Phoenix, became such huge sensations on social media during the journey.
Jono, I'm just noticing he's sort of taken on the Pirates of the Caribbean look there, hasn't he?
Yeah,
A little bit with
but
his
that happens.
hat.
I've had friends.
I quite like that.
I've had friends who've done this journey, who've travelled across the Atlantic, and they've rowed. None of them have ever made it to the governor arriving to greet them. And I think the difference is you add an animal to any of these special interest stories, and all of a sudden it's now more interesting to a lot of people. Had that guy been travelling without the cute cat that you can see right here, this story would not even be something we're speaking about. People cross the Atlantic every single day.
You know, it was an Associated Press story, and they're usually pretty good about wrapping up all the loose ends. And we don't know about this guy's health. But we do know that the cat made it. We do know the cat's name. And that, I think, goes to your point. People love stories, even if the humans are the secondary characters.
Yeah, and well done. It's an achievement in itself. He got the cat onto a boat. I can't get the dog into the car. So that in itself, and cats don't like water.
That's what I think. That poor cat.
I don't know. But the fact that there's an air mystery to it is what's made this story wonderful.
Exactly.
But also, I raised the issue about this gentleman's health. You don't care. You're more interested. How is the cat surviving on the water?
I forgot you even said he had a health issue. That was gone within 5 seconds.
We just like the fact he's a cat man, and he took his cat with him, which is really nice. And the cat's name is Phoenix. I was going to say something about the phoenix has risen, but I don't know if that's actually right, is it?
But also, what does it say about a man who has a cat rather than a dog?
I don't trust men who just have a cat.
Interesting.
Why, though?
I don't know, because I've got dogs and a stray cat that just moved in, but I always think I like a man with a dog.
Because he's more responsible, I think that's probably what it is.
Yeah, I agree.
Very little
And yet I
intervention.
saw something on social media the other day that looked at the greenest of green flags for a woman looking for a man is one who has a cat.
No.
Not a dog?
Not a dog.
Not a dog.
I would find that unusual.
Right?
Yeah,
There is
that seems unusual.
something that is unusual about it.
No,
I don't know why though.
I always thought it was dogs. I always thought dogs are a green flag.
They are, but this woman was saying that the greener flag is a man with a cat.
Okay, we're going to go and tell, what's the old saying? We're going to see a man about his dog.
See a man about a dog.
We're going
or a
to go
cat.
see a man about a dog. Okay, anyway, but that was great stories. Thank you so much. And that's all we got time for today. Thanks to today's guest, Dubai 92 presenter Jono Hayes and former editor-in-chief and media strategist Michael Jabri-Pickett. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. G&T with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. Goodbye, and thank you so much for joining us.